Welcome back to Sarah Werewolf Romance Collection, your sanctuary for fated mates and dangerous obsessions. Quick roll call for the pack. Where are you listening from right now? Let me know in the comments and drop a paw print emoji if you're currently ignoring your responsibilities to listen to this story. No judgment here. We're all addicted. Today's story is a masterclass in tension. We have an alpha king who is used to getting everything he wants, and a heroine who is about to become the one thing he can't control. But before we heat things up, if you want to claim your spot in our inner circle and unlock exclusive badges and emojis, hit that join button down below. Your support keeps the stories coming. Now, take a deep breath. He thinks he's the predator, but she's about to become the problem. Let's read. Chapter 1. The air inside the green thumb always smelled like a promise. A blend of damp earth, blooming jasmine, and the sharp, clean scent of fresh rain. It was my sanctuary, a chaotic jungle of greenery tucked away in the heart of Athelgard City, fighting a losing battle against the concrete giants rising around us. Meatball, if you sigh one more time, I'm putting you on a diet, I muttered, wiping down the potting bench. Meatball, my stout English bulldog, lay sprawled on his luxurious velvet cushion near the heater. He let out a snore that sounded like a chainsaw stuck in a log, completely ignoring my threat. He looked like a russet potato that had been dropped on the floor, lumpy, brown, and unapologetically lazy. He adjusted his bow tie, a red silk number that made him look like a disgruntled statesman, and went back to sleep. I smiled, tucking a loose strand of hair back into the pencil holding my messy bun together. Business had been steady, not exorbitant, but enough to keep the lights on and Grandpa Joe's poker debts manageable. The nursery was more than a shop. It was my legacy. My grandfather had built the trellis out back, and my mother had planted the wisteria that now choked the front gate in a beautiful embrace. The bell above the door chimed, cutting through the comfortable silence. I expected Mrs. Higgins coming for her weekly begonia, but instead, a courier in a uniform that looked far too expensive for a delivery service walked in. He held a thick, cream-colored envelope. "Delivery for Miss Hallie Bennett," he said, his voice void of emotion. I wiped my hands on my apron, leaving a streak of soil on the denim. "That's me." He handed over the envelope and left without another word. A heavy feeling settled in my stomach, sudden and violent, like a punch to the gut. The envelope was heavy, the paper thick and textured. The return address was embossed in silver foil. Draxler Industries. My fingers trembled as I tore it open. Dear Miss Bennett, regarding the property located at 42 Hazelwood Lane, acquisition notice, eminent domain, demolition scheduled for... The words swam before my eyes. They weren't just raising the rent. They were terminating the lease. They were bulldozing the Green Thumb to make room for an expansion of the nearby tech park. "No," I whispered. The sound was small, swallowed by the rustling leaves of the fiddle-leaf figs. "No, absolutely not." I read the signature at the bottom. Jake Draxler. The Alpha King. The CEO of Draxler Industries. The man who owned half of Athelgard City and seemingly wanted to pave over the other half. My sadness instantly calcified into a cold, hard rage. I wasn't some wilting violet he could just pluck and toss aside. I was an Omega, yes, but I was a Bennett. We didn't roll over. We had roots. I grabbed my keys off the counter. "Meatball, guard the shop. If Mrs. Higgins comes in, don't let her touch the orchids." Meatball opened one eye, judged my frantic energy with a huff, and closed it again. I marched out to the curb where my car, the Mint, was parked. She was a vintage Volkswagen Beetle convertible, restored to pristine condition in a shade of soft mint green. She was cute, reliable, and stood out like a sore thumb against the sea of gray sedans in the city. I threw the letter onto the passenger seat and cranked the engine. It purred to life. I wasn't going to call a lawyer. I wasn't going to send an email that would be deleted by some assistant. I was going to the Onyx Spire, and I was going to look the Alpha King in the eye and tell him exactly where he could shove his demolition order. The drive through the city was a blur of traffic and rising temper. By the time the massive dark structure of the Onyx Spire loomed over me, blocking out the sun, my hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I parked the Mint between a sleek black limousine and a sports car that valued higher than my entire inventory. I didn't care. I grabbed the letter, slammed the door, and marched toward the revolving glass doors. Jake Draxler thought he was buying a plot of land. He was about to find out he'd just stepped into a hornet's nest. Chapter 2. The Onyx Spire was designed to intimidate. The lobby was a cavern of black marble and steel, chilled to a temperature that I was sure kept the employees in a state of cryogenic preservation. The silence was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic clicking of my heels as I crossed the expanse toward the reception desk. "I'm here to see Jake Draxler," I announced, slamming the thick envelope onto the pristine quartz desk. The receptionist, a beta woman with glasses perched precariously on her nose, blinked at me. "Do you have an appointment?" "I have an eviction notice," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins like rocket fuel. "And I have a bone to pick." "Mr. Draxler is in a board meeting," she said, her tone dismissive. "He cannot be disturbed." "Hey, you can't go up there!" I was already moving toward the elevators. I didn't have a pass, but I had momentum. A security guard stepped forward, his hand raising. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to—" "If you touch me," I said, turning my hazel gaze on him with every ounce of authority I possessed, "I will scream so loud the glass in this lobby will shatter. I just want 5 minutes." Maybe it was the desperation in my scent, wild peonies spiking with distress. Or maybe he just didn't get paid enough to wrestle an angry woman in a floral sundress. He hesitated. That was all I needed. I slipped into an open elevator just as a businessman was exiting and hit the button for the top floor. The ride up made my ears pop. The doors slid open to reveal a foyer that screamed exorbitant wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city I was about to lose. Double mahogany doors stood at the end of the hall. I didn't knock. I pushed them open. The boardroom was massive. A long table occupied the center, surrounded by men and women in suits that felt obscenely priced. At the head of the table sat Jake Draxler. He was terrifying and frustratingly handsome. He was huge, his broad shoulders filling out his charcoal suit as if a boulder rested on his frame. His hair was dark, styled with precision, and his eyes were the color of a stormy sea, gray, turbulent, and cold. The room went silent. Every head turned to me. "Who let this woman in?" Jake's voice was a low rumble, vibrating through the floorboards. He didn't look angry. He looked bored, which was infinitely worse. "You," I said, marching down the length of the table. I threw the letter in front of him. It slid across the polished wood and hit his water glass with a clink. "You think you can just destroy my life with a piece of paper?" Jake picked up the letter with 2 fingers as if it were soiled. He glanced at it, then back at me. His expression didn't change. "The nursery on Hazelwood? It's an insignificant plot. We need the space for the parking structure." "Insignificant?" The word hit me like a slap. My legacy. My mother's wisteria. Grandpa Joe's trellis. It is my home. It is my life. It is collateral, he said coldly, his eyes dead to my pain. You'll be compensated. Now get out. I'm busy. He turned his head away, dismissing me like I was a fly buzzing around his lunch. The utter lack of respect, the arrogance, the sheer audacity of him snapped something inside me. The heat rose from my chest to my face. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I stepped forward, leaned over the table, and shouted, "I hate you!" And then I spat at him. It wasn't my finest moment. It was visceral, childish, and born of pure helplessness. The saliva hit his cheek, right near the corner of his mouth. The silence that followed was deafening. The air in the room grew heavy, suffocating, pressing down on us like the atmosphere before a tornado touches down. The other executives looked horrified, shrinking back in their chairs. Jake slowly turned his head back to me. He didn't wipe it away immediately. He lifted his hand, caught the droplet on his thumb, and looked at it. His nostrils flared, inhaling sharply. His pupils blew wide, swallowing the gray of his irises. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I expected him to shift. I expected him to kill me. Instead, he brought his thumb to his mouth and licked it off. His eyes locked onto mine, dark and swirling with a hunger that made my knees weak. A slow, dangerous smirk curled his lips. "Feisty," he purred, the sound rough and deep. "I love it." Chapter 3. The tension in the boardroom was palpable, thick enough to choke on. The other board members were staring at their alpha king as if he had suddenly sprouted a second head. Jake Draxler didn't tolerate disrespect. He crushed it. Yet here he was, looking at me like I was a particularly interesting puzzle he wanted to solve. My face burned. The adrenaline crash was hitting me, leaving my hands shaking. You're a monster," I stammered, though it lacked the fire of my earlier outburst. Jake didn't break eye contact. He waved a hand at the room without looking away from me. "Everyone out, now." There was a cacophony of scraping chairs and shuffling papers as the executives scrambled to obey. They fled the room like rats escaping a sinking ship, leaving me alone with the wolf. Once the doors clicked shut, the silence returned, heavier than before. Jake stood up. He was even taller than he looked sitting down, towering over 6 feet, a wall of muscle and dominance. He walked around the table, his movements predatory and smooth. I held my ground, lifting my chin. I refused to cower. "You have a very distinct scent, Miss Bennett," he said, stopping a few feet away from me. He wasn't invading my personal space, but his presence was overwhelming. "Wild peonies and rain." "I work with plants," I said defensively. "It's an occupational hazard." He hummed, a low sound in his chest. He reached for the file on the table, the acquisition papers, and flipped it open. His eyes scanned the details, which he had clearly ignored before. "Hallie Bennett, owner of the Green Thumb." He paused, his brows furrowed slightly. The stormy intensity in his eyes flickered, replaced by a flash of genuine surprise. "H. Bennett?" he murmured, more to himself than to me. "Yes," I snapped. "Is my name funny to you?" He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. He wasn't seeing the angry Omega anymore. He was seeing something else. "You're the one who sourced the Paphiopedilum rothschildianum orchids last month, the gold of Kinnabaloo." I blinked, thrown off balance. That was an incredibly rare, incredibly fussy orchid. I had shipped a crate of them to an anonymous buyer in the Gilded District weeks ago. It had been a nightmare to keep them alive during transport. Yes, I did. How do you know that? Jake cleared his throat, and for a split second, the scary Alpha King looked almost sheepish. He adjusted his silk tie. I acquired them. You? I scoffed. You bought rare orchids? What for? To pave over them? To grow them, he said, his voice dropping. He glanced at the door as if checking to make sure his executives weren't listening. I have a greenhouse in the penthouse. My mouth fell open. You're the anonymous buyer? The one who keeps complaining about the humidity levels in the shipping containers? They are sensitive plants, he said defensively, and your packing peanuts are terrible for the environment. They are biodegradable starch, I argued back, throwing my hands up. Wait, why are we talking about peanuts? You are trying to bulldoze my shop. Jake ran a hand down his face. The aggression had leaked out of the room, replaced by a bizarre confusion. He looked at the eviction notice, then at me. I could see the gears turning in his head. He was fighting a war inside himself, the ruthless businessman against the closet botanist who apparently respected my ability to source rare flora. I can't stop the construction, he said finally. The contracts are signed. The investors are waiting. Then I'm not leaving, I said, crossing my arms. You'll have to drag me out, and I'll have Meatball bite your ankles. Meatball? My dog. He's vicious. He wasn't. He was a marshmallow, but Jake didn't need to know that. Jake sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He looked at me again, his gaze dropping to my lips, then snapping back up to my eyes. A flush crept up his neck, staining his tan skin. He turned away, walking to the window to look out at the city. There might be another way, he said, his back to me. I'm listening. My offices. He gestured vaguely to the sterile gray room we were standing in. And my penthouse. They are lacking. They look like a prison designed by a robot, I agreed. He stiffened, then turned back around. A small, reluctant smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Precisely. I need someone to landscape the interior. A complete botanical overhaul. Living walls, rare specimens, maintenance. I'm a landscaper, not an interior decorator. You are the best botanist in the city, he stated simply. It was a compliment delivered as a fact. If you agree to personally oversee the project, working here in the Onyx Spire, I will reallocate the parking structure plans. I will build around your nursery. The green thumb stays. My heart skipped a beat. He was offering a lifeline, but the catch was him. You want me to work here? I asked suspiciously. With you? Is that a problem, Miss Bennett? He took a step closer. The air sizzled again, that weird electric tension returning. Or are you afraid you might accidentally spit on me again? Chapter 4. I'm not afraid of you, I lied. I was terrified. Not of his wolf, but of the way my own inner wolf was currently wagging her tail like a traitor. She liked him. She liked the way he smelled, like crisp mountain air and expensive scotch. It was infuriating. Then we have an accord? Jake extended his hand. His palm was large, calloused despite the suit. I looked at his hand, then at his face. I have conditions. He raised an eyebrow. You are in no position to make demands, Bennett. I am if you want your Paphiopedilum to survive the winter, I countered. 1, you don't hover. 2, I bring Meatball. He has separation anxiety. The vicious ankle biter? The very same. Fine, Jake grunted. Shake on it. I took his hand. His grip was warm and firm, engulfing mine completely. A spark of static electricity zapped us both. I gasped, and his eyes widened slightly, the pupils dilating again. He didn't let go immediately. He held my hand for a second too long, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. "Monday, 8 a.m., he said, his voice gruff as he pulled away abruptly. "Don't be late." Monday morning arrived with a gray drizzle that matched my mood. I had spent the weekend trying to convince myself that this was strictly business. I was saving the shop. That was it. I loaded the back of the VW Beetle with supplies, bags of soil, pruning shears, a spray bottle, and a crate of pothos and ferns to start with. Meatball sat in the passenger seat, wearing a blue bow tie today, drooling slightly on the dashboard. "Behave yourself today," I told him as we pulled up to the Onyx Spire. "No chewing on the billionaire." Getting a bulldog, a crate of plants, and a bag of tools through the lobby was a spectacle. The security guard from Friday recognized me and wisely decided to open the service elevator without asking questions. When the elevator opened onto the top floor, the silence was absolute. It was 8:05 a.m. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the cavernous hallway. "In here." I followed the voice to the boardroom. It had been cleared of the long table. In its place were stacks of architectural blueprints and a coffee machine that looked like it could launch a shuttle into space. Jake was standing by the window, looking at a tablet. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket today. He was in a white dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms that were thick with muscle and dusted with dark hair. My mouth went dry. "Focus, Hallie. Plants." "You're 5 minutes late," he said without turning around. "Elevator issues," I lied, setting the crate down. Meatball waddled in behind me, his nails clicking on the hardwood floor. He spotted Jake, let out a woof that sounded more like a cough, and immediately trotted over to sniff Jake's polished leather shoes. Jake froze. He looked down at the dog. Meatball looked up at the Alpha King, unimpressed, and proceeded to sneeze directly onto his shoe. I gasped. "Meatball, no!" I rushed forward to pull him away, but Jake waved me off. He crouched down, a movement that strained the fabric of his trousers in a very distracting way, and looked the dog in the eye. "This is the vicious beast?" Jake asked, his voice laced with amusement. "He's preserving his energy," I said, grabbing a rag to wipe his shoe. "Leave it," Jake said, standing up. He looked at me, and for a moment, the stormy eyes were clear. He looked almost shy. He gestured awkwardly to the corner of the room. I cleared that space for your equipment, if that works." "It's fine," I said, surprised by the consideration. And he reached behind the coffee machine and pulled out a small potted succulent. It was a Haworthia, rare and variegated. I thought, this might fit the lighting in the reception area. He held it out to me like a peace offering. The Alpha King, holding a tiny plant pot. I took it, our fingers brushing. "You have good taste, Draxler." He looked away, clearing his throat, his ears turning a distinct shade of pink. "Get to work, Bennett. I have a company to run." He marched out of the room, fleeing the interaction. I stood there holding the succulent while Meatball snored at my feet. "Well," I whispered to the dog, "this is going to be interesting." Chapter 5. By Wednesday, the boardroom of the Onyx Spire looked less like a center for international corporate dominance and more like a high-end botanical garden that had been invaded by a very sleepy gargoyle. I wiped a smudge of soil off my cheek and stepped back to admire my handiwork. The sterile, chrome and black aesthetic of the room had been disrupted by 3 6-foot fiddle-leaf figs I'd wrestled into the corners. Trailing pothos vines now cascaded from the tops of the filing cabinets, softening the harsh edges of the room. The air, usually recycled and stale, now carried the faint, earthy perfume of damp moss and fresh oxygen. "It looks like Jumanji in here," a nervous beta executive whispered to his colleague as they filed in for the morning briefing. "I heard the king likes it," the colleague hissed back, clutching his tablet like a shield. He fired the last cleaning crew for moving a fern. I hid a smile behind a spray bottle. Jake, Mr. Draxler, had been surprisingly tolerant of the chaos I brought. In fact, tolerant was an understatement. He seemed to be breathing easier. Meatball was currently snoring under the massive mahogany conference table. He had dragged his blue velvet cushion directly beneath Jake's chair, deciding that the Alpha King's feet were the safest place in the building. The double doors swung open, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Jake strode in, his presence hitting the room like a physical force. He was wearing a navy suit today, tailored so sharply it looked like it had been poured over his frame. His broad shoulders moved with the heavy grace of a predator, and his expression was a mask of cold indifference. Until he saw me, his stormy gray eyes locked onto mine across the room. The coldness didn't vanish, but it cracked. He gave me a barely perceptible nod before taking his seat at the head of the table. "Report," he commanded, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. I tried to make myself invisible in the corner, misting the leaves of a peace lily. The meeting was boring, something about acquisitions and stock splits, until a loud, wet snort erupted from beneath the table. The presenting executive, a man named Sterling— wait, no, generic name. Let's go with Mr. Henderson— froze mid-sentence. "What was that?" Jake didn't blink. "Continue, Henderson." Another snort followed, this one sounding like a clogged drain. Meatball was dreaming. Henderson looked terrified. "Sir, I believe there is a beast under the table." "There is," Jake said, leaning back in his chair. He casually crossed his legs, and I saw him nudge Meatball gently with his polished shoe. "He is security. Continue." I bit my lip to keep from laughing. The big, bad Alpha King was using my flatulent bulldog as an intimidation tactic. The meeting dragged on. I moved to the window to check the light levels for the succulents. As I leaned over the sill, sunlight catching the dust motes dancing in the air, I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. I turned. Jake wasn't looking at the projection screen. He was looking at me. His gaze was intense, heavy, and focused entirely on the way the sunlight hit my hair. When he caught me looking, he didn't look away immediately. His eyes darkened, the pupils blowing wide. For a second, the boardroom disappeared. It was just the two of us, suspended in a moment of palpable tension. Then, Henderson dropped his laser pointer. The spell broke. Jake snapped his head back to the front, his ears turning a furious shade of red. He was shy. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The man who could buy and sell this entire city was shy because I caught him staring. "Meeting adjourned," Jake barked suddenly, standing up. "Everyone out." "But sir, the quarterly projections— out!" The executive scrambled. As the door clicked shut, leaving us alone in the sudden silence, Jake loosened his tie. He looked at the plants, then at the floor, then anywhere but me. "The air quality is improved," he mumbled, walking over to the coffee machine. "You're welcome," I said, stepping closer. "And thanks for not kicking Meatball out. He has a snoring problem." "He's fine," Jake grunted, turning to face me. He looked at the spray bottle in my hand. You missed a spot. On the ficus. I did not, I defended, feigning outrage. Top leaf, left side. He pointed, a smirk ghosting his lips. If you're going to turn my office into a jungle, Bennett, do it right. Chapter 6. I need you to assess the penthouse level today, Jake said on Friday morning. He refused to make eye contact, focusing intently on his tablet. There are existing installations that require professional attention. Existing installations? I raised an eyebrow, adjusting the strap of my tool belt. You mean the dead plants you tried to keep alive before you hired me? They are not dead, he said defensively. They are dormant. He swiped a key card across a panel on the wall I hadn't noticed before. A private elevator opened. After you. The ride up was silent, but the air between us crackled with that strange static electricity. It made the hair on my arm stand up. Meatball sat between us, panting happily, oblivious to the fact that his owner was hyperventilating internally. When the doors opened, I expected a bachelor pad. I expected black leather, chrome, and maybe a single sad cactus. What I saw made my jaw drop. The entire penthouse was an open-concept masterpiece of glass and light. But that wasn't the impressive part. The entire eastern wall wasn't a wall at all. It was a climate-controlled, glass-encased atrium that spanned 2 stories. Oh my God, I whispered, stepping out of the elevator. I walked toward the glass doors. Inside, it was a paradise. There were rows of rare orchids, hanging pictures, vibrant bromeliads, and towering palms. It was a collection that would rival the city's botanical gardens, and it was exquisite. You did this? I asked, turning to look at him. Jake was standing by the elevator, looking like he wanted to crawl into a hole. He rubbed the back of his neck, his exorbitant watch catching the light. It's a hobby. A hobby? I laughed, walking into the atrium. The humidity hit me, warm and tropical. Jake, this is an obsession. This is a Paphiopedilum sandaranum. Do you know how hard it is to get these to bloom? Requires a temperature drop of 10 degrees at night, he recited automatically. He walked in after me, closing the door to seal the climate. He seemed to relax once he was inside, surrounded by the greenery. The stiffness left his shoulders. I thought you were just a suit, I admitted, running my fingers over the velvet leaf of a calathea. A corporate robot who wanted to pave over my legacy. I like things that grow, he said quietly. He was standing close to me now, looming like a mountain, but his energy was calm. The world outside, its noise, chaos, demands. In here, it's just life, I finished for him. He looked down at me. His eyes were soft, the stormy gray settling into a calm mist. Yes, life. Meatball waddled into the atrium and immediately tried to eat a low-hanging fern. Hey! Jake and I shouted in unison. We both dove for the dog. I grabbed Meatball's collar, and Jake grabbed his hindquarters. We hauled him back, collapsing onto the tiled floor in a heap of limbs and laughter. He has expensive taste, Jake chuckled, the sound deep and rich. It was the first time I'd heard him properly laugh. It transformed his face, erasing the harsh lines of stress and making him look younger, human. I found myself staring. I was lying on the floor of a billionaire's secret greenhouse, holding a snorting bulldog, looking at the alpha king, and thinking he had the most beautiful smile I had ever seen. Jake's laughter faded as he caught me staring again. The shyness returned, crashing down on him. He cleared his throat and scrambled to his feet, offering me a hand. I have a call, he stammered, pulling me up. His grip was strong, his palm rough against mine. "Evaluate the irrigation system. Send me the bill." He fled the room so fast he almost tripped over a watering can. "He likes you," I whispered to Meatball, who was licking a leaf. "And that is a terrifying problem." Chapter 7. By the following Tuesday, I had established a routine. I arrived at 8 a.m., watered the office plants, then went up to the sanctuary, as I now called the penthouse atrium, to work on the more delicate specimens. Jake, however, was deteriorating. The stress of the investors and the merger was etched into his face. He had dark circles under his eyes, and I hadn't seen him eat a real meal in 3 days. He existed on black coffee and sheer force of will. At 1 p.m., I marched into the boardroom. He was surrounded by papers, looking like he was about to murder a spreadsheet. "Lunch," I announced, slamming a Tupperware container onto his desk. He jumped, looking up with bleary eyes. "What?" "Lunch," I repeated. "You look like a wilting peace lily. It's pathetic. Eat." He stared at the container. "I'm busy, Bennett. I have a conference call with the Tokyo branch in 20 minutes. "Tokyo can wait. Your blood sugar cannot." I popped the lid. "It's homemade lasagna, Grandpa Joe's recipe. If you don't eat it, Meatball will, and the gas will be lethal." Jake looked at the lasagna, then at me. "You cooked for me?" "I cooked for myself," I lied smoothly. "I just made too much. Don't read into it." He hesitated, then picked up the fork. He took a bite. His eyes closed and a genuine groan of pleasure escaped his lips. "Oh, God." "Good?" "Exquisite," he murmured. He ate with the efficiency of a starving wolf, polishing off the container in minutes. When he was done, he leaned back, looking significantly more human. "Thank you," he said, his voice sincere. "You need to take better care of yourself," I scolded gently, taking the empty container. "You can't lead a pack if you drop dead from exhaustion." "I don't have anyone to remind me," he admitted, his voice low. He looked at his hands. "My life is solitary, by design." "That's a stupid design," I said. He looked up, surprised by my bluntness. "You surround yourself with people who are afraid of you," I continued, leaning against the edge of his desk. "They won't tell you to eat. They won't tell you when you have spinach in your teeth. You need people who aren't on the payroll, Jake." "I have you," he said. The words hung in the air, heavy and significant. He froze, realizing what he'd said. His ears did that adorable thing where they turned bright red. "I mean, as a contractor," he corrected quickly, shuffling papers nervously. "For the plants." "Right," I said, my heart doing a traitorous little flip. "For the plants." I turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "By the way, you don't have spinach in your teeth, but you do have sauce on your lip." He aggressively wiped his mouth with his sleeve, looking mortified. I walked out, grinning. The big bad alpha was crumbling, one lasagna at a time. Chapter 8. Thursday brought a torrential downpour that battered the glass walls of the onyx spire. The sky was a bruised purple, heavy with thunder. It was the kind of weather that made wolves restless. I was in the sanctuary, repotting a massive monstera that had outgrown its pot. It was messy work. My hands were covered in dark, rich soil up to my wrists. The elevator chimed and Jake walked in. He had removed his tie and unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of his shirt. He looked agitated. He paced the length of the atrium, running a hand through his hair. "Rough day?" I asked, not looking up from the roots. "The Southlands pack," he growled. "They're pushing the borders, testing the perimeter." "Is that dangerous?" "It can be." He stopped pacing and came to stand next to me. He watched my hands working in the dirt. They sense weakness.
If I show any crack in the armor, they'll strike.
You don't look weak, I said softly. You look tired. There's a difference. He looked at me, his gaze dropping to my muddy hands. You're dirty. It's dirt, Jake. It washes off. Without thinking, he reached out. He didn't touch my skin, but he hovered his hand over mine. The heat radiating from him was palpable. It was like standing next to a furnace. Allow me, he whispered. He reached for the watering hose I had nearby. He turned it on a gentle trickle. He took my hand, my muddy, grimy hand, in his large, clean one. He rinsed the soil away, his thumb rubbing circles on my palm. The sensation was electric. Every nerve ending in my body caught fire. It was intimate, far more intimate than it had any right to be. He was washing my hands with the reverence of a priest handling a holy relic. I looked up at him. He was staring at my hand, his expression unguarded. He looked fascinated. Jake, I breathed. He looked up. Our faces were inches apart. I could smell the storm on him, the ozone. No, not ozone. The smell of charged air and wet pavement. I could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. He leaned in. His eyes drifted to my lips. My breath hitched. He was going to kiss me. Here, in the jungle he built, with the rain smashing against the glass. Zzz. His phone vibrated violently on the metal table where he'd tossed it. We sprang apart like guilty teenagers. The moment shattered. Jake grabbed the phone, his face hardening instantly back into the alpha mask. Draxler? He listened for a second, his posture stiffening, the muscles in his neck corded with tension. When? How many? He looked at me, and the softness was gone. It was replaced by fear. Not for him, but for me. I'm on my way, he snarled into the phone. He hung up and looked at me. Go home, Hallie. Now. What's wrong? The perimeter has been breached, he said, his voice clipped. Get Meatball. Get in your car, go home, and lock the door. Jake, go! He roared, the command laced with alpha power that made my knees buckle. I didn't argue. I grabbed my bag, whistled for Meatball, and ran for the elevator. As the doors closed, I saw Jake shifting. His clothes shredded as his body contorted, fur erupting along his spine. The war had come to the city. And for the first time, I wasn't worried about my shop. I was worried about the lonely king left behind in the glass tower. Chapter 9. The elevator descent. Felt like a slow fall into the abyss. The numbers above the door ticked down with agonizing slowness. 40, 39, 38, mocking the frantic rhythm of my heart. Beside me, Meatball let out a low, vibrating growl that rattled in his chest. It was a sound I'd never heard from him before, stripped of his usual lazy indifference. I know, buddy, I whispered, clutching the strap of my bag until my knuckles turned white. We're leaving. We're going home. But the air in the confined space felt heavy, charged with a static pressure that tasted like copper and fear. Jake's roar still echoed in my ears, a command that had felt less like words and more like a physical shove toward safety. The doors chimed softly as we hit the lobby level. Ding! I rushed to step out, pulling Meatball's leash, but stopped dead in my track. The lobby of the Onyx Spire, usually a pristine cavern of silence and polished marble, was a scene of absolute devastation. The massive glass revolving doors had been shattered, shards of safety glass covering the floor like diamond dust. The receptionist was gone, her desk overturned. And standing in the center of the wreckage were 5 men. They didn't look like the polished executives who usually populated this tower. They were ragged, smelling of stale grease and old blood. Their eyes were wild, dilated with the adrenaline of a hunt. They were shifters, their bodies vibrating with the impending change. One of them, a man with a scar running through his eyebrow, turned his head. He sniffed the air, his lip curling back to reveal yellowed teeth. "Well, well," he sneered, his voice scratching like sandpaper. "Looks like the king left his dessert unattended." He stepped forward, crunching glass under his heavy boots. "You smell like him, girl, like the high tower." Meatball barked, a sharp, defiant sound, and lunged forward, straining against the leash. I yanked him back, stepping behind a marble pillar. "Stay back," I warned, my voice trembling but loud. "Security is on the way." "We ate security," the scarred man laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Grab her. The king will trade his crown for his mate." They surged forward. I scrambled back, looking for a weapon, a vase, anything. But before they could take 3 steps, the ceiling above the mezzanine exploded. It was a cacophony of twisting metal and shattering glass. A massive midnight black shape plummeted from the open central atrium, bypassing the floors above to crash land between me and the intruders with a force that cracked the marble floor. Jake. He was fully shifted. A creature of nightmare and shadow. He was enormous, easily twice the size of a normal timber wolf, his fur the color of a starless void. He snarled, a sound so deep it vibrated in my sternum like a bass drum. The intruders hesitated, fear flickering in their eyes, but their leader howled, shifting into a patchy gray wolf. "Kill him! He's alone!" They charged. Jake met them with a brutality that was terrifying to witness. He caught the first wolf in midair, his jaws snapping shut around its neck with a sickening crunch, tossing the body aside like a rag doll. But the other 4 were on him instantly, tearing at his flanks, their claws raking through his thick fur. "Run!" Jake's voice echoed in my head, not spoken, but pushed through the pack bond I had been trying so hard to ignore. I looked at the exit. The path was clear. I could grab Meatball and run to the beetle. I could be safe. I looked back at Jake. He was fighting like a demon, but he was overwhelmed. One wolf had latched onto his hind leg. Another was circling, looking for an opening at his throat. He was bleeding. For me. The fear in my chest evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. It was the same feeling I got when the bank threatened to foreclose, or when the frost threatened my seedlings. It was the refusal to yield. "Meatball," I said, shoving the bulldog behind the heavy reception desk. "Stay." Meatball, sensing the shift in my energy, sat down and whined. I kicked off my flats. I unbuttoned my jeans. I stepped out into the open, right as the circling wolf lunged for Jake's exposed throat. "Hey!" I screamed. The wolf turned mid-leap, confused. I didn't give him time to think. I let go. I pushed the human part of me down and let the badger wolf out. The change was instantaneous, a fluid reshuffling of bone and muscle. Chapter 10. Shifting always felt like diving into cold water, a shock to the system that sharpened every sense. The world exploded into a tapestry of smells, the copper tang of blood, the acrid sweat of the rogues, and the overwhelming, grounding scent of pine and storm that was Jake. I wasn't a large wolf. Compared to Jake's monstrous black form, I was diminutive. My fur was a mix of golden honey and dark brown, sleek and built for speed rather than brute force. But what I lacked in size, I made up for in sheer, unadulterated spite. Grandpa Joe always said I fought like a honey badger, low to the ground and mean as hell. The gray wolf that had been targeting Jake's throat snarled at me, dismissing me as a threat. Big mistake. As he lunged, I didn't try to meet his height. I dropped low, skidding across the slick marble, and clamped my jaws around his front ankle. I bit down until my teeth met bone. The wolf howled, twisting to snap at me, but I was already gone. I released him and darted underneath his belly, slashing upward with my claws before scrambling out the other side. Jake, realizing I hadn't run, let out a roar that shook the glass in the window frames. He was furious, but he used the distraction I provided. He shook off the wolf on his flank and spun around, his massive shoulder slamming into the one I had just hamstrung. The rogue flew across the lobby and hit the wall with a wet thud, sliding down motionless. Now it was 3 against 2. Jake and I moved instinctively, as if we had been fighting together for years. When a russet-colored wolf tried to blindside Jake, I was there, snarling and snapping at its face, forcing it to back up right into Jake's crushing bite. When I got cornered by the leader, Jake was there, a towering wall of shadow, shielding me with his body and taking the bite meant for my spine. It was a dance of violence, brutal and visceral. The lobby was destroyed, chairs smashed, drywall pulverized, but we were winning. The leader, realizing the tide had turned, yelped a retreat. "Fall back!" The remaining 2 wolves scrambled for the broken doors, tails tucked, slipping on the glass in their haste to escape the king and his golden shadow. Jake made a move to pursue, his predatory drive high, but I let out a sharp bark. "No!" He stopped, his chest heaving. He turned his massive head toward me. His muzzle was stained with blood, some his, mostly theirs. His eyes, usually so human in their intelligence, were wild and glowing. He stalked toward me. For a second, I thought he might attack me, lost in the bloodlust. But he stopped inches away, lowering his head to sniff my neck. He nudged me with his wet nose, checking for injuries, his breath hot against my fur. I leaned into him, licking a smear of blood from his cheek. The adrenaline crash hit us both simultaneously. My legs wobbled. We needed to shift back, and we were currently standing in the lobby of a corporate building, surrounded by shattered glass and dead rogues. Jake seemed to realize this too. He nudged me toward the service elevator, the only one not made of glass. I trotted over, but not before detouring to the reception desk. I barked once. Meatball's head popped up. He looked at me, a golden wolf, then at Jake. He gave a short, judgmental sneeze and waddled out, his little claws clicking on the floor. Jake let out a huff that sounded suspiciously like a laugh. He pressed the elevator button with his nose. As the doors slid shut, hiding the carnage from view, the reality of what just happened settled in. I had fought. I had shifted. And I hadn't run. Chapter 11. The elevator ride up to the penthouse was silent, save for the heavy panting of 2 wolves and 1 out-of-shape bulldog. When the doors opened into the sanctuary of the atrium, the storm outside was still raging, hammering against the glass walls as if trying to get in to finish what the rogues started. We moved into the living area. Jake shifted first. The sound of bones realigning was always unsettling, a series of wet pops and cracks. He stood up, glorious and stark naked, not an ounce of shame in his posture. He was bleeding from a gash on his shoulder and several claw marks on his ribs, but he didn't seem to notice. He walked over to a linen closet and pulled out a towel, wrapping it around his waist. Then he turned to me, tossing a large, plush bathrobe in my direction. "You can change," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'll turn around." I shifted quickly, the human form returning with an ache in my muscles. I scrambled into the robe, tying it tightly. It smelled like him, cedar and rain, and swallowed my frame completely. "You can turn around," I whispered. Jake turned. His expression was a terrifying mix of awe and fury. He marched across the room, closing the distance between us in 3 long strides. "I told you to run," he growled, looming over me. "I gave you a direct order, Bennett." "And I ignored it," I shot back, lifting my chin to meet his gaze. "I'm not one of your employees, Draxler. You don't order me around." "You could have been killed," he shouted, the volume making Meatball scurry under the sofa. "Do you have any idea what they would have done to you? They wanted leverage. They wanted me." "Exactly," I yelled, stepping into his space and poking a finger into his hard chest. "They wanted you dead. What was I supposed to do? Leave? Watch you get torn apart while I drove home to water my begonias?" "Yes," he roared. "That is exactly what you were supposed to do. My job is to protect. I don't need protection." I cut him off, my voice breaking. "I need a partner, Jake. If we are going to do whatever this is, then we do it together. I am not a damsel. I am a wolf. I have teeth, and I know how to use them." He stared at me, his chest heaving. The anger in his eyes warred with something else, something raw and desperate. He looked at my face, searching for any sign of deception. "You stayed," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Everyone else runs. Everyone else fears the monster. But you stayed." "You're not a monster," I said softly, reaching out to touch the bleeding gash on his shoulder. "You're just a man who needs stitches." He flinched at my touch, not from pain, but from the contact. He looked down at my hand on his skin. "Sit down," I commanded gently, pointing to the sofa. "I need to clean this before it gets infected." He hesitated, then slowly sank onto the leather couch. All the fight seemed to drain out of him, leaving him looking exhausted and vulnerable. I went to the bathroom and found the first aid kit, which, unsurprisingly, was stocked like a trauma center. I brought it back, along with a bowl of warm water and a cloth. "This is going to sting," I warned, dipping the cloth in antiseptic. "I've had worse," he grunted, staring straight ahead. I knelt between his legs, focusing on the wound. It was deep, a nasty tear from a claw. I dabbed it gently. Jake hissed, his hands gripping his knees until his knuckles turned white. "Sorry," I murmured. "It's fine," he rasped. I worked in silence for a few minutes, cleaning the blood from his skin. The storm outside provided a chaotic soundtrack to the quiet intimacy of the room. I could feel his eyes on me, watching my every move. "You were impressive," he said suddenly. I looked up, surprised. "I bit an ankle. It wasn't exactly heroic." "You fought like a honey badger," he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Vicious, relentless, beautiful." The word hung in the air. Beautiful. My hand froze on his shoulder. I looked into his eyes, and the air in the room shifted again. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind something much more dangerous. Chapter 12. The space between us seemed to shrink, charged with the same electric pull that had been plaguing me since the moment I spat in his face. Jake wasn't looking at the wound anymore. He was looking at my mouth. "Why?" he asked, his voice rough like gravel. "Why didn't you run, Hallie? Really?" I dropped the cloth into the bowl. The water turned pink. I rested my hands on his knees, grounding myself. "Because," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "My alpha betrayed me once. He made me feel small. He made me feel like I was just a pawn. I looked up at him, baring my soul. You make me feel big. You make me feel like I can grow. I wasn't going to let them take that away. Jake's breath hitched. He reached out, his hand trembling as he cupped my face. His thumb traced my cheekbone, his touch incredibly gentle for a man capable of such violence. I have spent my entire life building walls, he confessed, his eyes searching mine. Building towers, amassing power, all to keep the silence out, to keep the loneliness at bay. He leaned closer, his forehead resting against mine. But you walked in here with your plants and your snorting dog and your ridiculous lasagna, and you filled the silence. You are the noise I didn't know I needed. Jake, you are my missing rib, Hallie, he whispered, the ancient term for a fated mate hanging heavy in the air. I fought it. I tried to deny it because I didn't want to drag you into my darkness. But I can't. I can't breathe when you're not in the room. A tear slipped down my cheek. It was the validation I hadn't realized I was starving for. Accountability, partnership, love. Then don't fight it, I whispered. Surrender. He let out a low groan, a sound of pure defeat and longing. I surrender. He closed the gap. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was a collision. It was desperate and hungry, fueled by the brush with death and weeks of denied attraction. His mouth was hot and demanding, tasting of scotch and blood. I melted into him, my hands tangling in his damp hair, pulling him closer. He pulled me up, settling me onto his lap without breaking the kiss. The robe slipped off my shoulder. His hands roamed over my back, possessing me, mapping every curve. It was intoxicating, a drug I wanted to overdose on. Mine, he growled against my lips, his wolf surfacing in his voice. Yours, I breathed back. And you're mine. Don't forget that, Draxler. He pulled back slightly, his eyes shining with unadulterated adoration. I couldn't forget if I tried. He kissed me again, slower this time, a deep, thorough exploration that promised everything. The storm raged outside, shaking the glass walls of the onyx spire, but inside, in the arms of the Alpha King, everything was finally, perfectly still. We didn't just survive the attack. We had forged something new in the fire of it. And as Jake lifted me, carrying me toward the bedroom with Meatball snoring softly under the couch, I knew that the restoration of the Alpha King was going to be my greatest project yet. Chapter 13. The first thing I registered was the smell. It wasn't the metallic tang of blood or the charged scent of the storm anymore. It was cedar, expensive soap, and the musk of a deep, contented sleep. The second thing I registered was the weight. A heavy arm, solid and warm, was draped over my waist, pinning me to the mattress like a human seatbelt. I blinked my eyes open. The storm had passed, leaving the sky outside the floor-to-ceiling windows a bruised, watercolor mix of lavender and gray. We were in Jake's bedroom, a space that, unlike his office, felt lived in. The sheets were charcoal gray, of course, but they were impossibly soft, a thread count that was likely exorbitant. I shifted slightly, wincing as my muscles protested. Shifting into a wolf, fighting 3 rogues, and then surrendering to the Alpha King had taken a toll. Don't move. A gravelly voice mumbled against my neck. Jake tightened his grip, pulling me back against his chest. It's too early. It's 9 a.m., Draxler, I whispered, tracing the veins on his forearm. And your dog is snoring so loudly, I think he's vibrating the floorboards. Jake groaned, burying his face in my hair. Evict him. He's your security detail, I teased, turning in his arms to face him. Jake looked wrecked in the best possible way. His dark hair was a chaotic mess, standing up in tufts. The stormy gray eyes were heavy with sleep, losing that terrifying intensity for a moment of vulnerability. But then my gaze dropped to his shoulder. The bandage I had applied last night had bled through slightly. The angry red claw marks on his ribs were vivid against his tan skin. "Does it hurt?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Only when I breathe," he said dryly, but he caught my hand before I could pull away. He kissed my knuckles, his lips lingering. It was worth it. The memory of the previous night, the desperation, the heat, the absolute cacophony of emotions crashing together, flooded back. I felt my cheeks heat up. We hadn't just slept together. We had forged a bond that felt ancient. A tether snapped into place, humming with a low-frequency energy that connected us. "We have a problem," I said, trying to regain some semblance of practicality. "If it's about the board meeting, I canceled it," Jake murmured, closing his eyes again. "It's about the lobby," I corrected. "You know, the one that currently looks like a monster truck rally took place inside a jewelry box?" Jake's eyes snapped open. The peace vanished, replaced instantly by the sharp, calculating look of the alpha. He sat up, the sheet falling to his waist. He hissed slightly as the movement pulled at his stitches. "The breach," he muttered, running a hand over his face. "I need to assess the damage. I need to track the two that got away." "We," I corrected, sitting up and pulling the plush duvet around me. "We need to track them." He looked at me, opening his mouth to argue, but stopped. He saw the set of my jaw, the same stubbornness that had made me bite an ankle the size of a tree trunk. "We," he agreed reluctantly. "But first, coffee. And clothes." He gestured to the floor where my jeans and blouse lay in a shredded, muddy heap. "I don't think those are salvageable." "Great," I sighed. "I'm going to have to do the walk of shame in a billionaire's bathrobe." "There is no shame," Jake said, his voice dropping an octave as he leaned in, brushing a stray hair from my forehead. "Only survival and victory." He kissed me, a slow, lingering press of lips that made my toes curl, before pulling away. "I'll find you something to wear. Feed the beast before he eats the sofa." I watched him walk to the closet, limping slightly. My heart did a traitorous flip. I was in trouble. Deep, luxurious, terrifying trouble. Chapter 14. Wearing one of Jake's white dress shirts, sleeves rolled up 5 times, and a pair of his sweatpants cinched tight with a belt, I looked less like a Luna and more like a castaway who had raided a menswear store. We took the service elevator down to the lobby. Meatball trotted beside us, seemingly unaffected by the trauma of the previous day, though he did pause to sniff a particularly large shard of glass with suspicion. When the doors opened, the devastation was worse than I remembered. The morning light streamed in through the shattered revolving doors, illuminating the carnage. The marble floor was scratched and stained. The reception desk was on its side. Drywall dust coated everything like a ghostly snow. A team of nervous-looking cleanup crews and security guards were already there, sweeping glass and boarding up the entrance. They froze when the elevator dinged. When Jake stepped out, the air in the room changed. The workers lowered their heads, sensing the Alpha's presence. He radiated power, despite the bandage peeking out from the collar of his fresh black t-shirt. "Status," Jake commanded, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. A beta with a clipboard hurried over, looking like he might faint. "Sir, we have secured the perimeter. The police have been handled. Gas leak story. The Bodies have been removed. Any sign of the others? No, sir. The trail went cold at the river. I walked past them, toward the planter boxes I had installed just days ago. They were smashed. My beautiful Zamioculcas samifolia was crushed under a slab of drywall. They killed my plants, I whispered, a cold fury settling in my gut. Jake appeared at my shoulder. We will replace them. It's not about replacing them, I said, picking up a broken ceramic pot. It's the disrespect. They came into your house, Jake. They broke your things. They threatened your partner. I looked at him. This wasn't just a hit. It was a message. The message was received, Jake growled, his eyes darkening to the color of a thunderhead. And the reply will be loud. Excuse me? A shrill voice cut through the tension. I turned to see a woman in a severe gray suit stepping over the caution tape. She had a tablet in her hand and a look of absolute horror on her face. It was Ms. Vane, the head of HR, whom I had briefly met on Tuesday. Mr. Draxler, the shareholders are in a panic. The stock dropped 4 points because of the gas leak rumor. And who? She stopped, looking at me. Her eyes scanned my baggy outfit, then flicked to Jake, then back to me. Oh. Ms. Vane, Jake said coolly. Meet Hallie Bennett. She is consulting on the reconstruction. Consulting? Ms. Vane raised an eyebrow, looking at Meatball, who was currently trying to hump the leg of a security guard. Is the dog also a consultant? He is the head of morale, I said, stepping forward and extending a hand. And we're going to need a lot of morale. Ms. Vane, I need a list of every employee who swiped in yesterday. If there was a breach, someone let them in. The perimeter alarm never tripped, Ms. Vane. Those doors were opened from the inside before they were shattered. Jake looked at me, surprise flickering in his eyes. He hadn't thought of that yet. Ms. Vane blinked. Yes, of course. I'll pull the logs. And get me a coffee, Jake added, stepping closer to me, his shoulder brushing mine. Black, and a tea for Ms. Bennett. Earl Grey, 2 sugars. He remembered. As Ms. Vane scurried away, Jake leaned down. Head of morale? He's doing his best, I said, nodding at Meatball, who had given up on the guard and was now eating a piece of drywall. We need to go to the Green Thumb. If the trail went cold at the river, they might be doubling back. They know who I am, Jake. They called me your dessert. They won't get near you again, Jake swore, his hand instinctively going to the small of my back. I know, I said, looking at the wreckage. Because next time, I'm bringing the pruning shears. Chapter 15. We took the Mint, my VW Beetle, to the nursery because Jake's limousine was currently being examined by forensics, and because I refused to let him drive in his condition. Meatball sat in the back, head out the wind, ears flapping like bat wings. The Green Thumb was exactly as I had left it, a chaotic, blooming oasis on Hazelwood Lane. The wisteria was drooping slightly, thirsty from my absence. It's quiet, Jake noted, stepping out of the car. He scanned the street, his body tense. He was in full protector mode, his head on a swivel. Too quiet, I agreed. Usually Mrs. Higgins is lurking around here trying to steal cuttings. I unlocked the gate. The bell chimed, a cheerful sound that felt jarring after the violence of the morning. Hallie girl, is that you? A voice boomed from the back of the shop. Grandpa Joe emerged from the greenhouse, wiping grease on a rag. He was a sturdy man in his 70s, wearing suspenders and a newsboy cap that had seen better decades. He had a twinkle in his eye that usually meant he was up to no good. Grandpa! I rushed over and hugged him. He smelled like pipe tobacco and fertilizer. "Where have you been?" he demanded, pulling back to look at me. "I've been holding down the fort, but the ferns are getting restless. And who is this large individual looming in my doorway?" Joe squinted at Jake. Jake stepped forward, extending a hand. "Jake Draxler. Nice to meet you, sir." Joe ignored the hand. He stared at Jake, his eyes narrowing. He walked a slow circle around the Alpha King, inspecting him like he was a used car. He poked Jake's bicep. "Solid," Joe muttered. "Expensive shoes, calculating eyes. You look like trouble." "Grandpa, be nice," I warned. "He's a friend." "A friend who buys you orchids?" Joe asked slyly. "I saw the invoices, Hallie. Paphiopedilum, very romantic. Or very nerdy, I can't decide." Jake cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "I assure you, my intentions are—" "To rob me blind?" Joe interrupted, finally shaking Jake's hand with a grip that was surprisingly strong. "I know who you are, Draxler Industries. You're the one trying to turn my shop into a parking lot." "Not anymore," I interjected quickly. "We have a deal. The shop stays." "A deal?" Joe raised a bushy eyebrow. "Does this deal involve you wearing his sweatpants?" I turned bright red. Jake coughed, looking at a hanging basket with intense fascination. "We have a situation, Joe," I said, dropping the voice. "Rogues. They attack the spire. They're targeting Jake, and they know about me." Joe's playful demeanor vanished instantly. The sparkle in his eye hardened into steel. He wasn't just a gardener. He was a retired beta who had lived through the pack wars of the 90s. "Rogues?" Joe spat. "In Ethelgard? That's bold. Or desperate." "They were organized," Jake said, his voice serious. "They had a leader. Scar over his left eye." Joe's face went pale. "That sounds like Varg," he whispered. "Nasty piece of work. Ex-enforcer from the north. Got kicked out for eating the livestock." "Varg," Jake tested the name. "You know him?" "I played poker with his father," Joe said, walking over to the counter and pulling a shotgun out from under the register. He cracked it open to check the load. "If Varg is here, he's not working alone. He's a mercenary. Someone hired him." Jake and I exchanged a look. A mercenary. That meant the threat wasn't just a territorial dispute. It was a coup. "We need to flush him out," Jake said. "He won't stop until the contract is fulfilled." "He'll come here," I realized, a cold chill running down my spine. "He knows I'm the weak link." "You are not a weak link," Jake said fiercely. "You are the bait." "Excuse me?" I put my hands on my hips. "Not like that," Jake said quickly. "We control the playing field. We use the nursery. It's a maze of glass and foliage. You know every inch of it. I don't." "Home turf advantage," Joe nodded, snapping the shotgun shut. "I like it. I've got some specialized fertilizer in the back that makes a wonderful explosive if mixed right." I looked at my grandfather, then at my mate. "You two are terrifying." "We're family," Joe grinned, showing a gold tooth. "Now, Mr. Alpha King, do you know how to prune a hydrangea? Because if we're waiting for assassins, we might as well work." Jake had stationed his elite guard, the ones who weren't recovering from the lobby attack, in the alleyways surrounding the block. But inside the nursery, it was just us. The greenhouse was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of the city streetlights filtering through the glass roof. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and tension. I crouched behind a wall of towering bamboo, my heart hammering against my ribs. I wasn't wearing a dress tonight. I was wearing tactical gear Jake had had delivered. Black cargo pants, boots, and a vest that was surprisingly light. "Check in," Jake's voice came through the earpiece. "Position Alpha," I whispered. "Grandpa Joe is in the loft with the..." Fertilizer surprise. Position Bravo, Jake replied. He was on the other side of the nursery, hidden in the shadows of the fern grotto. Remember the plan, Hallie. You are not to engage unless necessary. You lure, you run. You let me handle the heavy lifting. Aye, aye, Captain, I muttered, adjusting my grip on the high-pressure hose I had rigged up. It wasn't a gun, but 500 psi of water to the face was a decent deterrent. I had sent Meatball back to the spire with the first shift of guards. I missed his snoring. It would have been comforting in the oppressive silence. Time stretched. A cricket chirped. A car drove by outside, its bass thumping. Then, the sound of breaking glass. It came from the rear skylight. Not a smash, but a delicate tink of a glass cutter, followed by the soft thud of boots hitting mulch. They're in. Joe's voice crackled in my ear. 3 of them, north quadrant. Hold, Jake commanded. I held my breath. I could hear them moving, the soft crunch of soil under boots. They were moving tactically, silent as ghosts. Where is he? A rough voice whispered. It wasn't Varg, it was a lackey. Upstairs office. That's where the light is. They were heading for the trap. We had set up a dummy in the office, silhouetted against the window. I watched through the leaves as 3 shapes moved past my hiding spot. They were in human form, carrying suppressed pistols. Shifters using guns. It was cowardly, and it confirmed they were mercenaries. As they passed the hydrangeas, I signaled Joe. Now. Joe pulled the tripwire. A massive net, usually used for securing large tree deliveries, dropped from the rafters. It fell with a heavy whoosh, entangling 2 of the men. Ambush! One screamed. The 3rd man rolled away, raising his gun. Jake! I yelled. Jake erupted from the ferns. He didn't shift. There wasn't room in the tight aisles. He moved with human speed that bordered on supernatural. He tackled the gunman, slamming him into a display of terracotta pots. The crash was deafening. The 2 men in the net were struggling, shifting into wolves to rip through the mesh. Hallie. Water! Joe shouted from the loft. I cranked the valve. The high-pressure hose bucked in my hands. I aimed it at the net. The jet of water hit the shifting wolves with the force of a fire hose, knocking them back into the mud and blinding them. Nice shot! Joe cackled. But we had miscalculated. Varg isn't here! Jake shouted, pinning the gunman to the ground. Where is he? The gunman laughed, blood bubbling on his lips. He didn't want the king. He wanted the heart. My blood ran cold. The heart. I wasn't the target. Grandpa! I screamed, turning toward the loft. A shadow detached itself from the darkness of the rafters above Joe. Varg. He had been on the roof the whole time, waiting for us to spring our trap so he could flank us. He dropped down behind Joe, a knife glinting in the moonlight. No! I scrambled out of the bamboo, abandoning the hose. Joe turned, raising the shotgun, but Varg was too fast. He backhanded the old man, sending him sprawling into a pile of potting soil. The gun skittered away. Varg grabbed Joe by the collar of his suspenders, holding the knife to his throat. He looked down at us, his scarred face twisted in a grin. Drop it, King! Varg shouted, or the old man gets pruned. Jake froze. I froze. The silence of the nursery returned, heavy and suffocating. Let him go, I said, my voice shaking. He has nothing to do with this. He's family, Varg sneered, and that makes him leverage. He looked at me. You come here, little badger. You trade places. The king for the grandfather? No, the mate for the grandfather. I looked at Jake. He was shaking his head imperceptibly, his eyes pleading with me not to do it. I looked at Joe. He was wheezing, blood trickling from his lip, but he winked at me. Winked. I took a step forward. Okay, let him go. Hallie, no, Jake growled. I'm coming up, I said, walking toward the ladder. Just don't hurt him. I put my hand on the rung. I looked at Varg. And then I looked at the Paphiopedilum hanging basket directly above Varg's head, the one suspended by a rope tied to the railing next to Joe's hand. Joe's hand twitched toward the knot. I smiled. You should really check the structural integrity of this place. It's a fixer-upper. Joe pulled the knot. Chapter 17. Gravity, as it turned out, was a very effective weapon. Grandpa Joe stomped on Varg's foot and threw himself sideways just as he yanked the knot. The rope unspooled rapidly, the pulley squealing in protest. The hanging basket, a massive wire-framed beast containing a 50-pound Platycerium superbum, staghorn fern, soaked in water, plummeted from the rafters. Varg never saw it coming. He was too busy sneering at me, savoring the moment of his perceived victory. Crunch. The basket struck Varg directly on the shoulder and head. The sound was sickening, a mix of cracking ceramic, bending wire, and the dull thud of a heavy object hitting flesh. Varg crumbled instantly, his knees buckling under the weight. The knife slipped from his hand, clattering uselessly onto the loft floor. "Bullseye!" Joe shouted, scrambling back from the collapsed mercenary. He kicked the knife away, sending it skittering over the edge of the loft to the ground below. "Joe!" I screamed, already halfway up the ladder. "I'm fine, Hallie girl," he called down, though his voice shook. "Just a little dirt on the suspenders." Below me, Jake had finished subduing the gunman. He zip-tied the man's wrist with a practiced efficiency that was terrifying to watch. Hearing Joe's confirmation, Jake looked up at me. His face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead from the strain on his stitches, but his eyes were burning with intensity. "Secure him," Jake ordered, pointing to the loft. "I'll handle the trash down here." I vaulted onto the loft platform. Varg was groaning, half buried under a pile of fern fronds and potting soil. He tried to push himself up, his eyes unfocused and swimming with concussion. "Stay down," I growled, grabbing a shovel that Joe had conveniently leaned against the railing. I brandished it like a broadsword. Varg blinked, trying to focus on me. You dropped a plant on me." "It's a staghorn fern," I corrected, breathless. "It's very rare. You owe me $500. "Who sent you?" Jake's voice boomed from below. He was limping toward the ladder, dragging the unconscious gunman by the collar. Varg spat a mouthful of blood onto the wooden floorboards. He looked at me, then over the railing at the Alpha King. The fight had drained out of him, replaced by the dull resignation of a professional whose contract had just been terminated. "Rickard," Varg rasped. "The Northern Alpha. He said the king was soft. Said he was distracted by a piece of tail." Jake froze on the ladder. The temperature in the nursery seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Rickard," Jake repeated, the name sounding like a curse. "And how did Rickard know where to find us?" Varg let out a wheezing laugh. "Your own people, King. You got a leak in the spire. Some chatty little bird in HR who loves to brag to her cousin." My stomach dropped. Miss Vane. Jake climbed the last few rungs, ignoring the pain that must have been tearing through his shoulder. He hauled himself onto the loft, looming over Varg. "You will tell the police it was a robbery gone wrong," Jake said, his voice low and dangerous. "If you mention Rickard or the pack or anything supernatural, I will find you in your cell, and I won't bring a fern next time." Varg nodded weakly. "Understood." Jake turned to Joe. "Sir, are you injured?" Joe wiped the blood from his lip with the back of his hand. He looked at Varg, then at the destroyed fern, then at Jake. He grinned, revealing a blood-stained tooth. "Never felt better," Joe said. "But you're paying for the cleanup, King." Chapter 18. The cleanup took hours, but by 2 a.m. the nursery was silent again. The police had come and gone, accepting the story of a botched robbery by disgruntled competitors. Varg and his men were in custody, likely facing a very long time in a very dark hole. We returned to the Onyx Spire in silence. The adrenaline crash was brutal. I was exhausted, covered in potting soil, again, and my tactical vest felt like it weighed a ton. But Jake wasn't tired. He was vibrating with a cold, controlled rage. "Bring her up," Jake spoke into his phone as we entered the penthouse elevator. "Now." "Jake," I said softly, reaching out to touch his uninjured arm. "You're bleeding again." "It can wait," he said, his jaw tight. "The leak cannot." When the elevator doors opened, 2 of Jake's security guards were already there, escorting a terrified Miss Vane into the living room. She was wearing pajamas and a trench coat, looking like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. Meatball, who had been sleeping on his velvet cushion, lifted his head. He looked at Miss Vane, let out a huff, and went back to sleep. Even the dog knew she wasn't a physical threat. "Mr. Draxler?" Mrs. Vane squeaked. "I don't understand. Why was I brought here? Is it the stock price?" Jake walked to the window, staring out at the city lights. He didn't look at her. "Do you have a cousin named Rickard?" Ms. Vane froze. The color drained from her face so fast, she looked like a ghost. "Ricky? Yes. He lives in the north. Why?" "And did you tell Ricky about my whereabouts?" Jake asked, turning slowly. His voice was deceptively calm, which made it infinitely more terrifying. "Did you tell him about Hallie Bennett? About the nursery?" We were just talking," Ms. Vane stammered, wringing her hands. "He asked how work was. I mentioned you were spending time with a consultant. It was just office gossip. Is he okay? Did something happen?" "He sent a hit squad," I said, stepping forward. I was still wearing the tactical gear, dirt smudged on my cheek. "To kill us." Ms. Vane gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "No, Ricky he's a logistics manager. He's not—" "He is an alpha," Jake corrected. "A rival who used you to get to me. Your gossip almost cost 3 lives tonight, Ms. Vane." She began to sob, sinking onto the nearest chair. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know." Jake watched her, his expression unreadable. I could see the conflict in him. The alpha wanted to destroy the threat. The man knew she was just a pawn. "Hallie," Jake said, looking at me. "What is the verdict?" I blinked. "Me?" "You were the target," he said simply. "You decide her fate." I looked at Miss Vane. She was pathetic, shaking and weeping. She wasn't malicious, she was just careless. And in our world, carelessness was dangerous. "She's fired," I said firmly. "Obviously. And she signs an NDA so strict that if she whispers my name in her sleep, she gets sued." I walked over to her. "And call your cousin. Tell him you were fired for incompetence. Tell him the hit failed. Tell him the king is very, very angry." Miss Vane nodded frantically, tears streaming down her face. Yes, absolutely. I am so sorry." "Get her out of here," Jake commanded the guards. As they dragged the sobbing woman away, Jake finally sagged. The tension left his frame, and he winced, clutching his shoulder. "You're too kind," he murmured, walking over to me. I'm pragmatic, I said, unbuckling the tactical vest and letting it drop to the floor. She's not the villain, Jake. Rickard is. And we'll deal with him later. Right now, you need to lie down before you bleed on your expensive rug. Chapter 19. 3 days later, the Onyx Spire felt different. The tension of the attack had dissipated, replaced by a strange domestic calm. It was Sunday morning. Sunlight poured into the penthouse atrium, illuminating the lush greenery that I had spent the last week cultivating. The air smelled of jasmine and coffee. I was in the kitchen, a sleek chrome space that I had cluttered with herbs and mismatched mugs, making pancakes. Meatball was sitting on my foot, waiting for me to drop something. He was wearing a new bow tie, this one green with little white daisies on it. "You are a bottomless pit," I told the dog, tossing him a piece of bacon. He caught it with surprising agility and swallowed it whole. "Don't feed the security detail," Jake's voice rumbled from the doorway. "It makes them soft." I turned. Jake was leaning against the doorframe, holding a mug of coffee. He was wearing gray sweatpants and a tight black t-shirt that clung to his chest. His arm was out of the sling, though he was still moving stiffly. "He deserves it," I said, flipping a pancake. "He kept my feet warm all night." Jake walked over, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind. He rested his chin on my shoulder, careful not to jostle his stitches. "I thought I was the one keeping your feet warm." "You were hogging the duvet," I countered, leaning back into him. "It was a survival situation." He chuckled, the sound vibrating against my back. He kissed the sensitive spot behind my ear. "Grandpa Joe called. He wants to know if we're coming for poker night." "Are you ready to lose more money?" I asked. "He hustled you out of $1,000 last time." "I let him win," Jake lied smoothly. "You had a pair of twos, Jake. You didn't let him win. You got destroyed." He groaned. "The man is a card shark. I'm convinced he marks the deck." "He absolutely marks the deck," I laughed. "That's part of the charm." Jake turned me around in his arms. His gray eyes were clear, bright, and full of affection. The darkness that usually clung to him seemed miles away. "I like this," he whispered, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "Pancakes, the dog, you." "It's not bad," I admitted, looping my arms around his neck. "For a grumpy alpha king." "Rickard sent a missive," Jake said suddenly, his tone shifting slightly. "He denied everything, claimed Varg was a rogue agent. He's backing down." "He knows he missed his shot," I said. "He knows you're not distracted anymore." "No," Jake corrected, his gaze intense. "He knows I'm not alone anymore. An alpha is strong. An alpha with a mate who fights like a honey badger? That's invincible." I smiled, feeling the warmth of the bond hum between us. "Does this mean I get a raise? I am technically your landscape architect." "You get room and board," he teased, leaning in closer. "And unlimited access to the greenhouse. Throw in unlimited coffee, and you have a deal." "Done." He kissed me, tasting of coffee and promise. It was slow and lazy, a Sunday morning kiss that said we had all the time in the world. Meatball barked at the stove. "The pancakes!" I shrieked, breaking away. Smoke was rising from the pan. I flipped it, revealing a charred black disc. "Well," Jake said, looking at the burnt offering, "looks like we're ordering room service." Chapter 20. 2 months later. The grand reopening of the Green Thumb was an event. It wasn't just a nursery opening. It was a society spectacle. The street was blocked off. There were food trucks, a string quartet playing pop covers, and enough flowers to bury a small village. I stood by the newly restored front gates, smoothing down the skirt of my emerald green dress. It was exorbitant, a gift from Jake, naturally, but it made me feel like a queen. "Stop fidgeting," Jake murmured in my ear. He was wearing a charcoal suit, looking every inch the Alpha King, but his hand was resting possessively on the small of my back. "I'm nervous," I admitted. "What if nobody comes?" "Hallie," he said with a dry look, gesturing to the line of people wrapping around the block. "Half the city is here, mostly because they want to see the woman who tamed the breaker." "I didn't tame you," I whispered back. "I just gave you better hobbies." "Same thing." Grandpa Joe was holding court near the buffet table, telling a highly embellished version of the Battle of the Hanging Basket to a group of captivated debutantes. He claimed he had fought off 10 ninjas with a trowel. Meatball was the star of the show. He was sitting on a custom-made throne near the entrance, Jake's idea, wearing a tuxedo collar. People were lining up to take selfies with him. He looked miserable and adorable. "You did good, Bennett," Jake said, looking at the nursery. It was better than before. The glass was new, the plants were thriving, and the energy was vibrant. "We did good," I corrected. "I have something for you," Jake said, reaching into his pocket. My heart skipped a beat. "Jake, we talked about this. No public proposals. I will throw up." "It's not a ring," he chuckled, pulling out a small velvet box. "Relax." He opened it. Inside sat a key. It was old, brass, and intricate. "What is this?" "It's the key to the clock tower," he said softly. "In the onyx spire. The old mechanical one at the very top. I've started restoring it, but I need a partner." I looked at him. The man who ruled the city, who commanded armies, was asking me to help him fix a clock. It was the most romantic thing I had ever heard. "You want me to get grease on this dress?" I asked, smiling. "I'll buy you a new dress," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I'll buy you 1,000 dresses." I took the key, closing my fingers around the cool metal. "I love you, Jake Draxler." "I love you, Hallie Bennett," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "You are my missing rib, my breath, my chaos." "And you," I said, standing on my tiptoes to kiss him as the crowd cheered, "are my favorite fixer-upper." Meatball let out a loud, resonant sneeze that echoed through the microphone system. The crowd laughed. Jake laughed. And as the sun set over Ethelgard City, bathing my nursery in golden light, I knew that for the first time in a long time, everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. The end.
Quick favor, don't go anywhere yet.
If you thought Hallie was brave for spitting in the Alpha King's face, wait until you meet the heroine in this next story on your screen. You have to hear this disaster unfold. Click the video on your screen right now. It is absolutely unhinged.